Archiving started.
Hello, this is Dr. Leslie Ann Asmus, and welcome back to the first recording session, which I had a brief introduction from kids wanting to go to the park. So now I'm back, and let's continue hypothesis testing. Where was I? Here I was. Relationships of risks and sample size. So if you don't change your sample size, an increase in alpha can happen as a result of decreasing beta. So they're inversely related. Alpha increases as the beta. And again, beta was type 2, probability of type 2 error. Alpha is the probability of a type 1 error. And so those are inversely related. As n increases, as I mentioned previously, both the type 1 and type 2 probability of errors, probability of type 1 and type 2 errors, alpha and beta, respectively, will decrease. They are related. I think this is saying the same thing. Okay. This is saying the same thing. If the null hypothesis is false, beta is a maximum when the true value of the parameter approaches the hypothesized value. Beta is a maximum. The probability of a type 2 error is a maximum when the true value of the parameter approaches the hypothesized value. That's that example I showed you a moment ago when the guilty verdict, the defendant is guilty, but it's not so clear. Same kind of thing here. If your null hypothesis is the mean salary is equal to, or the mean income is equal to $50,000, and the true parameter value, the true mean, is actually $100,000, then the probability of accepting that it's $50,000 is not that much, right? But suppose that the true mean value is $52,000, and your hypothesis, your null hypothesis says that it is $50,000. Then it's not so clear. And then the probability of a type 2 error, i.e. the probability of accepting $50,000, when in fact it's actually 52, gets to be quite large. And so that's all this is saying. Just putting some numbers to this example. The greater the distance between the true value and the hypothesized value, the smaller beta will be, such as the hypothesis is that the mean salary, the mean income is $50,000, but the actual one in true life is $100,000. Probably going to have a smaller probability. You're going to have a probability of type 2 error accepting $50,000 when the true income is $100,000. It's going to be a lot smaller. Okay, p-value. And again, these are going to come clear, hopefully, both from the textbook, but also when we meet up in class and work through some of the examples. P-value is the lowest value level of significance at which the observed value of a test statistic is significant. Blah, 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 blah. Reject HO if a computed p-value is less than or equal to the desired level of significance, alpha. So p-value is actually the value associated with your sample result. And you measure that. And what you're kind of getting at is, with a p-value, you're also saying, okay, I draw a sample. So if the null hypothesis is true, I draw a sample, and let's say that my null hypothesis, let's stick with the 50,000. I say the mean of the population household income is $50,000. I draw a sample, and that sample result turns out to be $65,000. The average household income of my sample turned out to be $65,000. I could then determine a value, assuming 50,000 is correct. What is the probability that I would have gotten a sample with a mean of 65,000? And that's what I'm figuring out with a p-value. How likely was it that I would draw this particular sample given the null hypothesis is true? And then I'm going to compare it against the predefined alpha value. Again, that alpha value, the probability of a type 1 success, is typically given before you start any of your hypothesis, before you've even drawn a sample. You would say, okay, my level of significance is alpha. And so p-value is a little bit different. It's determined after you've drawn your sample and based on your test results, your sample results. Okay, so summary procedures for hypothesis testing. You state a null hypothesis. My true population statistic theta is equal to some value. Choose an appropriate alternative, H1 or HA, from one of these. Either your alternative could be that the population statistic is lower than the null, it's higher than the null, or simply it's not equal to that. So I could have, and the first two are single-sided tests, and the last is a double-sided test. So I could say, okay, the average income for a population is $50,000. My alternative hypothesis could be that the average population is higher than 50,000. That's the first one. Or rather, that's the second one. If I say the population, my alternative could be that the population household income is lower than 50,000. That would be the first one. Higher than 50,000 would be the second one. And I could then have a double-sided test, which is simply it's not equal to 50,000. And that's that last option for your alternative hypotheses. You choose your level of significance level of significance or significance level, alpha, and then you select the appropriate test statistic and establish the critical region. Now, if the decision is based on a p-value, it isn't necessary to decide what this critical region is. So again, you would, depending on the nature of the test that you're running, and again, we'll look at this in class, either you're defining that kind of that line I had over there, the statement of judgment or whatever that was in the justice system examples, that particular cutoff line about whether somebody's guilty or not guilty. Do you define that hard line before you even run the test, or are you going to be working with p-values and adjust it accordingly? You obtain your sample data. You perform the test of hypothesis and make a decision based on your sample data. Compute the value of a test statistic from the sample data, and you're basically going to either reject the null hypothesis or you're going to be accepting it based on what you find in your sample results. Okay, so that is just a brief kind of conceptual what is hypothesis testing about. And we've done it and I just talked about it from the standpoint of a sample mean and the population mean through all my examples now. Now suppose that when we talk about hypothesis testing, we're going to be looking at it from a standpoint of proportions. And so I'll give you this example and then these couple of examples, and then I'll go through how hypothesis testing looks and feels with proportions, and then we'll go through these. I'll actually go through these examples, the solutions to these. So, example 1, missile manufacturer claims that the probability of success for a missile MX is 0.80. 80% of the time, a missile fires correctly. To demonstrate its reliability, 15 missiles are fired. If 9 are successful, do you agree with the manufacturer's claim? Example 2, a manufacturing company has submitted a claim that 90% of the items produced on a certain process are non-defective. An improvement to the process is being considered that they feel will lower the proportion of defectives below the current 10%. So 90% are non-defective, so therefore 10% are defective. You put in a new process, and hopefully the number of defects coming off of that process will be less than the 10%. If an experiment of 100 items, i.e. a sample, are produced with the new process and 5 are defective, is this evidence sufficient to conclude that the method has been improved, the process is an improvement? All right. So in order to kind of really think about both of those and structure them as a hypothesis test, let's take a look at how what I just said about in the general